Hey guys, it's Alex with Hammond Watch. I'm here today with the Longines HydroConquest 41. And it's a watch I'd had my eye on for a while. I always appreciated the design language of the HydroConquest. You know, the deal breaker for me was always the bezel. The aluminum bezel in the old variant was just a little bit funky, and I didn't feel like it matched the watch very well. I think this more simplistic ceramic bezel really ties everything together, and I've really enjoyed my time with it over the past few weeks. The measurements on this watch are a little bit odd. You know, everything's really thin, but it's also really wide. So at 41 millimeters, you expect it to kind of wear a certain way, but if you measure to the tip of the crown, you're at 45.5. Additionally, everywhere I looked for the lug-to-lug was saying 50 millimeters or 50.5. I don't know if that measurement's being taken at this kind of outermost edge, but if you go kind of farthest tip to farthest tip, I'm getting 51 millimeters, which is kind of just beyond where I like to be. But to combat that and make the watch more comfortable, Longines sunk the articulation point of the end link in a bit. So that effective lug-to-lug is really 48.5. And the bracelet articulates straight down, so it wears incredibly comfortable. Just if you have a smaller wrist, I suggest going in, trying to find an AD, and trying one on in person first. The 39 millimeter may be a little bit more suited to you. I really enjoy the execution of the crown and crown guards. Obviously, the design isn't going to be for everybody, but in general, I think it gives the watch more of its own personality. The gripping on the crown is phenomenal. It's both sharp and soft. You know, no real hot spots. I will say at 6 millimeters, it sits just a little bit below the guard, so you will feel that on the top of your hand from time to time. It doesn't hurt or dig in too aggressively. It just reminds you that you're wearing a pretty wide watch, which doesn't bother me too much. You know, I wear a lot of watches that don't have crown guards and just have a big exposed piece that hits your hand from time to time. So it's really no worse than, you know, the Unimatic I just reviewed or a Super Ocean Heritage. One of the bigger selling points of the watch overall is its thinness. At 12.2 millimeters thick, it really feels nice on wrist. You know, it's thin and wide, so it just feels planted, and you don't get a ton of wobble in any direction. One of the measurements that does make me a little bit sad, though, the lug width is 21 millimeters. You know, this watch is going to be living on its bracelet, so it's not a huge deal, but I tend to swap in straps quite a bit, and in general just don't have a lot of 21 millimeter stocked. That said, finding 21 millimeter straps is easier today than it ever has been, so that complaint is starting to kind of disappear a little bit. The case is completely brushed, so they wanted to give it a little bit of pop and change of finishing, so you have this really nice polished mid-link. You also have polishing on the sides of the bracelet, as well as on the bezel itself, just giving a little bit of extra shine to the watch and breaking it up so it's not quite so mundane. It is a little bit more of a dressy diver than a straightforward tool watch. The bracelet tapers down really nicely to 19 millimeters, and then you're back up to 20.6, 20.7 for this clasp. The clasp is probably the weakest part of the watch. That's a stamped metal clasp, which is a bit of a mixed bag. You know, I like milled clasps, they look and feel nice, but in general they tend to be a lot bigger and chunkier. With this watch trying to keep everything really, you know, kind of as thin as possible, I think it really helped to go this direction. You've got milled out hardware in the middle, which is nice, but then we're right back to a pressed diver's extension. I don't use my diver's extension ever. If I ever need extra length, I'm typically just going to throw it on a strap so that I don't have to worry about it. That said, it's just that one spot of the watch where they clearly kind of cut corners and tried to save a little bit of money. I like the branding with the hourglass and wings on the fold over. I'm not as big a fan of putting the water resistance on the clasp. I don't fully understand why it needs to be here. I don't know if this maybe fits another watch and they just wanted to put 300 meters so that they weren't completely interchangeable. But all in all, I could have done with a little bit better execution here. That said, being completely brushed is really nice. You know, it doesn't necessarily match the bracelet as well as you would like, but as someone that, you know, sits at a desk for most of his life, you know, knowing that I'm going to be able to get this kind of rebrushed out and get all the scratches removed once they build up is a little bit comforting. And in general, being a stamped metal, I don't imagine the replacements are too expensive. The screw down case back on this watch is one of my favorites. I love their logo. You know, a big fan. I think the execution here is phenomenal. It's not a light engraving like you see on most watches. They have a little bit of that around the outside of the logo with, you know, your basic kind of specifications listed out. But in general, I think it gives it a really sharp look. And this is a very nice, like, bead blasted feel to it. Just another kind of texture and another finish, making the watch just that much more interesting. Behind this case back is part of the reason that the watch is so thin. The movement they use is the Longines L888. That's based on an ETA A31, which is like a 2892. The positives to that are that it's a little bit thinner than a 2824, so you're able to keep a really nice tight profile. Also, you're able to get 72 hours of power reserve without slowing the watch down. You know, that's kind of a divisive issue. When you see like the Powermatic 80 watches, yes, you get 80 hours of power reserve, but they had to slow the watch movement to do it. This kind of comes out of the box ready to go. So I think it's a really nice addition, and your accuracy right about plus or minus 10 seconds a day I think is completely acceptable given the price. Price point on these, retail you're looking at $1,600. You can go gray market though and pick them up right around just under $12. And that's what I did. You know, I picked this up from Joma Shop. If you Google like Joma Shop coupon and the month and year you're in, you can typically find, you know, $25, $50 off your purchase, and it really makes it even that much more attainable. That also kind of tells you who this watch is competing with, which I would say Oris is the most direct competitor. I think that's phenomenal. You know, both really good brands, great execution, and watches with a ton of personality. You know, not just straightforward homages. You know, things that have a lot of their own flavor. The bezel itself is 120 click. I think it feels phenomenal. No real play. I mean, you get a little bit of wiggle as it kind of sets in. But the alignment is perfect, and I love the luster of the ceramic. You know, some watches kind of brush that down to keep it very tooly. They went full kind of dress diver with this, and I really appreciate it. The sapphire crystal has a wonderful application of anti-reflective coating. You know, you can see my lights kind of jumping in and out, but you don't see anything very well defined, and nothing really obstructs the view of the dial. I do think that some of the flat variants, like I think the green one is completely flat. That probably gives you a touch more visibility. As this dial isn't entirely flat, there's like a really mild sunburst to it. But I really like the whole range, and I also like that they're giving you, you know, size options, you know, 39, 41, 44, you know, kind of whatever your preference is. They've got one that should fit your wrist relatively well. The dial is phenomenal. You know, I love the handset. I know that, again, much like the guards here, it's not for everybody, but I think that's what I appreciate most. You know, this watch has so much of its own flavor that it's just not going to appeal to everybody. The handset, you'll notice your seconds track, or your seconds hand is actually hitting the minutes track, as is the minutes hand. As the hour hand goes around, it's also clipping all of the numbers, which you have the 12, 6, and 9. I also really like the plots that they have outside of those. You've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Having the 9 is nice. You know, it helps to balance the dial more, that you have that same plot on both sides, you know, with the date wheel brought in and then the 9. Although, you know, it's kind of hard to call the watch balanced overall. You know, having a big 9 and then jumping over to the smaller date window. It is a little bit heavy to the left side of the watch. But then you have the crown and guards kind of making a statement out to the right side. And I think somehow it all just works together. Like maybe like it shouldn't, but it absolutely does. So here we are in my 7.5 to 7 3/4 inch wrist. The watch fits beautifully. Again, great profile, very nice and tight and compact close to your wrist. But then when you look to tell the time, you'll notice it does take up quite a bit of real estate. One last thing I did want to touch on that I thought was pretty cool. I really like when watches nail the width of the bezel and the width of the case. Like there is no overhang in either direction. You know, the bezel doesn't stick out any farther than the case and vice versa. They come right up to each other very flush. And I think it just shows a great attention to detail. So being a Swatch Group brand, you're going to get Swiss Super Luminova. Doesn't have the brightest glow, but it's got a really nice blue hue to it. Much like other dressy divers though, that's not really the point. You know, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more straightforward dive watch, you know, Seiko and Oris are going to be much stronger directions to go for that. But in general, you know, this glows about as much as it needs to, but absolutely no more than that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this closer look at the Longines HydroConquest. I do like Longines as a brand. I think they walk a very nice fine line of being nice enough to be really well respected, while at the same time not being so over the top and expensive that they're not perfect for certain situations. You know, I've got really nice watches that I don't wear to certain places just because I don't want to feel like I'm trying to flex real hard or anything. I just want to wear a really nice, well-rounded watch. And this one really kind of fills that hole for me. If you get a chance though, make sure before you buy one you can try one on. You know, if you like bigger watches, the 41 still may work for you. I don't know that the 44 is going to be necessary. And likewise, if you've got a smaller wrist, you know, make sure you try that 39 on before you pull the trigger, or at least before you take any of the packaging off that's not going to allow you to return the watch. They are quite wide. If you guys have enjoyed the video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It helps out tremendously in YouTube's analytics. Also consider subscribing. I try to put watch content out weekly, and I hope to see you in the next one.